It was just another ordinary evening in a small suburban town. The kind of night where the streets were quiet, the air carried a slight chill, and most people had already settled into their routines, watching TV, scrolling through phones, or getting ready for bed. But for one woman, this particular night would turn out to be anything but ordinary. That Dr. Elena Vasquez, an astrophysicist who spent her days studying stars and galaxies, was sitting in her backyard with her teenage son. She had set up her homemade telescope earlier that evening because she wanted to observe something special, a rare alignment of planets visible only once every few decades. It wasn't just work for her. It was passion. Her son, Matteo, sat nearby on a folding chair, sketching constellations in his notebook. He loved listening to his mom talk about the universe, even if he didn't always understand all the science behind it. Tonight, though, he was more focused on drawing Orion's belt and imagining what ancient civilizations might have thought when they first looked at those same stars. Thousands of years ago, as midnight approached, the sky seemed darker than usual, almost like it was holding its breath. Elena adjusted her telescope, peering through the lens with excitement. "This is going to be amazing," she whispered to herself. Matteo glanced up from his notebook and smiled. His mom always got this way when she was excited about space. Her eyes sparkled brighter than any star. But then, something strange happened. At first, it was so subtle that neither of them noticed right away. One of the stars blinked. Just once, like a camera flash going off in the distance. Matteo frowned. "Mom, did you see that?" he asked, pointing toward the sky. Elena lowered the telescope and looked up. Sure enough, another star flickered, and then another. Within seconds, entire clusters of stars started blinking erratically, as if someone had flipped a switch and turned them on and off again. Some disappeared completely, leaving dark gaps in the heavens, while others reappeared in places they hadn't been before. It was chaotic, unpredictable, and utterly baffling. "What is happening?" Elena muttered under her breath. She grabbed her phone and opened an app connected to observatories around the world. Alerts were flooding in one after another from astronomers reporting similar phenomena. Gravitational anomalies, bursts of cosmic radiation, and strange energy surges were being detected everywhere. This wasn't localized to their little corner of the planet. It was global. No, not just global. It was universal. Matteo stood up, staring wide-eyed at the sky. "Is this normal? Is this supposed to happen?" Elena shook her head slowly. "No, this isn't possible." Meanwhile, halfway across the globe, a young amateur astronomer named Priya Patel was hunched over her computer, analyzing data from her university's radio telescope array. She was trying to figure out why the instruments were picking up so much noise-random signals that didn't make sense. Normally, this kind of interference could be chalked up to solar flares or satellite activity, but tonight there was no obvious explanation. As she sifted through the data, something caught her eye. Buried deep within the static was a repeating pattern, a sequence of pulses that followed a specific rhythm. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Priya leaned closer to the screen, her heart racing. Whatever this was, it wasn't natural. She forwarded the discovery to colleagues around the world, including Elena, whose reputation as a brilliant scientist preceded her. When Elena received the email, she opened it immediately. As she studied the signal, a chill ran down her spine. This wasn't coming from outer space. It was originating from Earth itself. The realization hit her like a thunderclap. What if Earth wasn't just a passive rock floating in the void of space? What if it was alive in ways humanity had never considered? And what if, after centuries of abused pollution, deforestation, climate change, it had finally reached its breaking point? Back in the backyard, Matteo tugged on his mom's sleeve. "What does it mean?" he asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and fear. Elena hesitated. How do you explain something you don't fully understand yourself? All she knew for sure was that the rules of the universe, the ones scientists had spent lifetimes figuring out, were suddenly being rewritten. And whatever was causing it, it wasn't done yet. As the two of them stood there, gazing at the chaotic sky, a question hung heavy in the air. If Earth could blink its stars like warning lights, what would it do next? The next morning, the world woke up to a reality that felt like it had been pulled straight out of a science fiction movie. Social media was flooded with videos and photos of the night sky stars flickering, disappearing, and reappearing in bizarre patterns. People posted theories ranging from alien invasions to government experiments, but no one could agree on what was actually happening. The only thing everyone seemed to share was a growing sense of unease. Elena barely slept that night. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together the fragments of information coming in from observatories worldwide. By sunrise, her phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Calls poured in from colleagues, journalists, and even strangers who recognized her name from previous interviews about space phenomena. Everyone wanted answers, but Elena didn't have any, not yet. At least, she decided to head to the university where she worked. On the way, she noticed how different everything felt. Birds weren't chirping like they usually did at dawn. The wind seemed oddly still, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Even the streets, normally bustling with early commuters, were eerily quiet. It was as though the entire planet was waiting for something. When Elena arrived at the lab, she found Priya already there, surrounded by stacks of data printouts and half-empty coffee cups. Priya looked exhausted but determined. She greeted Elena with a nervous smile. "I've been decoding more of the signal," she said, gesturing toward her laptop. "It's clearer now." Elena leaned over to look at the screen. There it was, a series of pulses forming a pattern. At first glance, it resembled binary code, the language of computers. But when translated, the message became chillingly clear. "You have taken too much." Elena's stomach tightened. She read the words again, just to be sure. Then she looked at Priya. "This is Earth talking," she said softly. "It has to be." Priya nodded, though her expression betrayed her skepticism. But how? How can a planet talk? Elena didn't have an easy answer. Instead, she started explaining her theory. For decades, scientists had speculated that Earth might function like a living organism, an idea often referred to as the Gaia hypothesis. According to this concept, the planet's atmosphere, oceans, forests, and even its magnetic field worked together like organs in a body, maintaining balance and stability. If that were true, maybe Earth wasn't just reacting to human actions. Maybe it was consciously responding. As Elena spoke, Matteo walked into the room, carrying a tray of snacks he'd picked up from the vending machine. He listened quietly, his brow furrowed in thought. When Elena finished, he asked, "So, you're saying Earth is alive? Like, really alive?" "In a way, yes," Elena replied. "Think of it like this. When someone gets hurt, their body sends signals to the brain telling it something's wrong. What if Earth does the same thing, but on a much bigger scale? All the pollution, deforestation, and climate change, we've pushed it too far. And now it's trying to tell us." Matteo frowned. "But why now? Why not earlier? That's the question, isn't it?" Elena said. "Maybe we finally crossed some invisible line. Or maybe—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. While Elena and Priya dug deeper into the signal, reports of strange events began flooding in from all corners of the globe. In Japan, Mount Fuji erupted unexpectedly, spewing ash high into the atmosphere. In Africa, rivers dried up overnight, leaving behind cracked earth and stranded wildlife. Closer to home, massive storms formed without warning, tearing through cities and leaving destruction in their wake. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. Amidst the chaos, there were moments of breathtaking beauty. Auroras danced across the skies in places they'd never been seen before, in tropical regions, deserts, and even urban areas. People gathered outside to watch the glowing ribbons of green, pink, and purple light swirl above them. Some cried, others prayed, and many simply stood in awe, feeling both humbled and terrified by the display. Back at the lab, Elena received another email from Priya, containing additional fragments of the signal. This time, the message was even more direct. Leave me, or I will leave you. The words sent shivers down Elena's spine. They sounded almost like a threat, but also like a plea, a desperate cry for help. Priya stared at the screen, her hands trembling slightly. Do you think it means what it sounds like? She asked. That Earth might kick us out somehow? I don't know, Elena admitted. But whatever it means, we can't ignore it. We need to figure out how to respond. Word of the discovery spread quickly. Within hours, news outlets around the world were reporting on the mysterious signal and Elena's theory that Earth might be communicating. Governments scrambled to address the situation, convening emergency meetings and releasing statements urging calm. Scientists debated endlessly, some supporting Elena's hypothesis, while others dismissed it as speculative nonsense. Amidst the global panic, Matteo couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow connected to what was happening. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he had a vivid dream. He was standing in a vast, empty field under a swirling vortex of light. The air buzzed with energy, and a voice not loud, but firm spoke directly to him. You have taken too much? Matteo woke up with a start, his heart pounding. The words echoed in his mind, clear as day. He sat up, trying to make sense of what he'd experienced. Was it just a dream? Or was it something more? The next morning, he told his mom about it. Elena listened intently, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she placed a hand on his shoulder. I don't know what's going on, she said, but I think you might be part of this in a way none of us understand yet. Matteo didn't feel comforted. If anything, he felt more confused and scared. What did it mean to be part of this? And why him? As the days passed, the world continued to reel from the unfolding crisis. Protests erupted in major cities, with people demanding action to protect the environment. Others took to social media, sharing stories of how they planned to live more sustainably. Still, there were those who refused to believe the phenomenon was real. Conspiracy theories gained traction, claiming the signal was a hoax designed to control the population. Corporations reliant on fossil fuels fought back against calls for change, arguing that the economic cost would be too high. Through it all, Elena remained focused. She knew humanity was running out of time. Whatever Earth was trying to communicate, it wasn't just a warning, it was a deadline. The question was whether people would listen before it was too late. By the third day, it was impossible to ignore what was happening. The world had changed in ways no one could have imagined. Strange things were occurring everywhere, things that defied explanation and left people questioning everything they thought they knew about life, science, and the universe itself. The Earth wasn't just sending signals anymore. It was acting out. And its actions were loud, chaotic, and undeniable. In coastal towns, tides surged without warning, flooding streets and homes. Inland, rivers ran backward, as if gravity itself had lost its grip. Forests burned in places where fire had never been a threat, while deserts bloomed with wildflowers overnight. It was as though the planet was throwing tantrums, lashing out at humanity for years of neglect and abuse. Some called it divine punishment, Others saw it as nature reclaiming its territory. But whatever it was happening on a scale no one could comprehend. Elena spent most of her time glued to her laptop, poring over data and coordinating with scientists around the globe. She barely slept or ate, driven by an urgency she couldn't explain. Every new report made the situation clearer and more terrifying. The signal from Earth wasn't fading. If anything, it was growing stronger. More fragments of the message came through, each one sharper than the last. You have taken too much. Leave me, or I will leave you. But now there was something new, a shift in tone. The words weren't just warnings anymore. They carried hints of despair, almost like cries for help. Elena felt a pang of guilt every time she read them. She'd spent her career studying the stars, searching for answers beyond our planet, but she'd rarely stopped to think about the ground beneath her feet. Now, that same ground was speaking to her, and to everyone else in a language impossible to ignore. Mateo, meanwhile, was struggling to process everything. Ever since his dream, he'd been having strange sensations. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he could feel vibrations in his chest, like the earth itself was humming. Other times, he'd hear whispers, not actual voices, but faint echoes of the words from the signal. He tried talking to his mom about it again, but she didn't have any answers. All she could do was reassure him that they'd figure it out together. One evening, as Mateo sat alone in his room sketching constellations, he heard a knock on the door. It was Priya, holding a stack of papers filled with graphs and equations. "Hey," she said softly, sitting down beside him. "Your mom told me about your dreams. Can I ask you something?" Mateo nodded hesitantly. "When you hear those words, the ones from the signal, what do they feel like? Do they sound angry or sad?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Sad, I think. Like someone who's tired of being ignored." Priya exchanged a glance with Elena, who stood leaning against the doorway. Neither of them said anything, but Mateo could tell they were thinking the same thing he was. What if the Earth wasn't just mad, it was hurt? The next morning, world leaders convened an emergency summit broadcast live to billions of people. For the first time in history, nations put aside their differences to focus on a single shared crisis. Scientists, activists, and spiritual leaders spoke passionately about the need to heal the planet. Elena was invited to address the assembly, and though public speaking wasn't her strong suit, she stepped up to the podium knowing this might be humanity's last chance to listen. She began by sharing her theory that Earth was alive in ways we'd failed to understand. She explained how centuries of pollution, deforestation, and climate change had pushed the planet to its breaking point. But instead of lecturing, she appealed to people's emotions. "Imagine if you were Earth," she said. "If you gave us everything, your air, your water, your soil, and we kept taking without giving back. How long would you stay silent? How long would you endure?" Her words resonated deeply. People watching at home hugged their loved ones tighter, vowing to make changes. Protests erupted in cities worldwide, not out of anger, but out of hope. Communities came together to plant trees, clean beaches, and demand better policies from their governments. For the first time in decades, humanity seemed united not by fear, but by a desire to fix what had been broken. But not everyone was ready to change. Corporations dependent on fossil fuels fought back fiercely, dismissing the phenomenon as a natural fluctuation or even a hoax. Conspiracy theorists claimed the signal was fabricated to impose global control, pointing fingers at shadowy organizations they believed were manipulating events behind the scenes. These voices gained traction online, sowing doubt and confusion among those already resistant to change. Despite the backlash, Elena refused to give up. She worked tirelessly alongside Priya and other scientists to decode more of the signal, hoping to find a way to respond. They knew they couldn't undo centuries of damage overnight, but maybe they could offer something simpler, an apology. A heartfelt plea for forgiveness. As days turned into weeks, Mateo's connection to the signal grew stronger. One night, unable to sleep, he wandered outside and looked up at the sky. The stars still flickered erratically, their usual patterns, distorted beyond recognition. He closed his eyes, letting the hum in his chest guide him. Suddenly, he felt a surge of energy, an overwhelming sense of presence, as if the earth itself was reaching out to him. When he opened his eyes, he found himself standing in the middle of a glowing field of light. Above him, the swirling vortex from his dreams loomed larger than ever, pulsating with colors that shifted and danced. The voice returned, louder this time, but still gentle. "Help me," it whispered. "Tell them." Mateo woke with a start, his heart racing. He ran to his mom's room, shaking her awake. "Mom, I know what we need to do," he said breathlessly. "We have to talk to it, to Earth. We can't just listen. We have to answer." Elena stared at him, wide-eyed. She didn't fully understand what he meant, but she trusted him. Together, they went to Priya, who listened intently as Mateo described his vision. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "What if?" she began, her voice trembling with excitement. "What if Mateo is the key? What if he can act as a bridge between us and whatever intelligence is behind the signal?" The idea was risky and unproven, but they didn't have time to second-guess themselves. If the Earth was truly alive and communicating, then ignoring it was no longer an option. They had to try. Over the next few days, the three of them worked nonstop, setting up equipment and running simulations. They decided to amplify the signal using Mateo's unique sensitivity, hoping to send a message, not of defiance, but of reconciliation. Their plan was simple, yet audacious. They would apologize to Earth and ask for another chance. On the day of the experiment, they gathered at a remote mountain peak, far from city lights and interference. The air was crisp, and the sky above shimmered with distorted stars. As Mateo focused on channeling the signal, Elena and Priya monitored the equipment, their nerves stretched taut. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground trembled violently, and the air crackled with electricity. Mateo clenched his fists, sweat dripping down his face as the hum in his chest grew louder and louder. And then silence. For several long seconds, the world held its breath. Slowly, the storm subsided. The stars stabilized. The chaos that had gripped the planet for weeks began to fade, replaced by an eerie calm. Had it worked? Had humanity been given a second chance? Only time would tell. But as Elena looked at her son, exhausted but triumphant, she allowed herself a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they'd done enough to earn forgiveness for now. The silence that followed the experiment was deafening. It wasn't just quiet. It was as if the entire universe had paused to catch its breath. For a moment, Elena, Mateo, and Priya stood frozen, staring at the sky, waiting for anything to happen. Had their message been heard? Or had they failed? Then, slowly, the stars began to stabilize. The chaotic flickering stopped, replaced by a steady glow. The swirling auroras that had painted the skies for weeks dimmed, leaving behind only faint traces of color. The ground beneath their feet stopped trembling, and the air felt lighter, calmer. It was as though the planet itself had exhaled, but the relief was short-lived. Just as humanity began to think the worst was over, the cosmos erupted into chaos again, only this time, it wasn't just Earth acting out. The stars themselves seemed to lose their minds. Across the globe, astronomers watched in stunned disbelief as galaxies shifted positions overnight. Entire clusters of stars vanished without explanation, only to reappear in completely different parts of the sky. Black holes appeared where none should exist, swallowing nearby stars, whole like ravenous beasts. The fabric of space-time itself seemed to stretch and warp, bending rules that had governed the universe since the dawn of creation, not in cities and towns around the world. People gathered outside to witness the spectacle. Some prayed, others wept, and many simply stared upward, unable to process what they were seeing. The night sky, once a source of wonder and inspiration, now felt alien and unpredictable. It was as if the universe had decided to rewrite its own story, and humanity was caught. In the middle of the rewrite, Priya, who had spent her life studying the stars, couldn't believe what she was observing. She sat hunched over her laptop. In the makeshift lab they'd set up on the mountain, frantically analyzing data streaming in from telescopes around the world. "This isn't just Earth anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "It's everything." Elena nodded grimly. Whatever they had done or hadn't done during the experiment, it had triggered something far beyond anything they could have anticipated. The signal they had sent back to Earth hadn't just affected the planet. It had rippled outward, disturbing the delicate balance of the entire universe. As the days passed, the effects became more pronounced. Time itself seemed unstable. In some regions, clocks ran slower than usual, while in others, hours flew by in what felt like minutes. Gravity fluctuated wildly, causing objects to float or crash unpredictably. People reported feeling lightheaded, disoriented, as though their bodies weren't quite sure how to function in this new reality. Matteo, meanwhile, continued to experience vivid sensations. The humming in his chest grew louder, almost unbearable at times, and the whispers in his mind became clearer. He no longer needed to close his eyes to see the swirling vortex of light. It was always there, hovering at the edge of his vision, calling to him. At first, he tried to ignore it, afraid of what it might mean. But as the days went on, he realized he couldn't shut it out any longer. One evening, after another restless night, Matteo confided in his mom. "I think I'm connected to whatever's happening," he said quietly. "Not just Earth, the stars, too. It's like they're talking to me." Elena listened carefully, her heart heavy with worry. She didn't fully understand what was happening to her son, but she knew one thing for certain. Matteo was special. Whether by chance or design, he had become a bridge between humanity and the forces reshaping the universe. And if anyone could help make sense of the madness, it was him. Together, Elena, Matteo, and Priya worked tirelessly to decode the ongoing signals. They discovered that the message from Earth wasn't just affecting the planet, it was rewriting the fundamental laws of physics. Every atom, every particle, every force in existence obeyed a new set of directives encoded in the transmission. The rules that scientists had spent centuries uncovering were being erased and replaced with something entirely new. "It's like the universe is rebooting itself," Priya said one night, rubbing her temples in frustration. "But why? And what happens when the reboot is complete?" No one had an answer. All they could do was watch and wait, hoping against hope that the changes wouldn't spiral further out of control. Amidst the chaos, Matteo began having dreams again, dreams so vivid they felt more like memories. In them, he stood in the middle of the glowing field, surrounded by the swirling vortex of light. This time, however, he wasn't alone. Figures emerged from the light, humanoid, but not human, their forms shimmering like liquid starlight. They didn't speak, but their presence conveyed a single powerful message. Balance must be restored. When Matteo woke, he described the dream to Elena and Priya. Both women listened intently, their expressions a mix of awe and fear. "It's not just Earth," Elena said finally. "It's the entire universe. We've disrupted something bigger than we ever imagined." "But what does it mean?" Matteo asked, his voice tinged with desperation. What are they trying to tell us? Elena hesitated before answering. I think it means we're part of something much larger than ourselves. Earth isn't just a planet, it's a piece of a cosmic puzzle, and somehow we've thrown that puzzle off balance. As the days turned into weeks, the trio devised a bold plan. If Matteo truly was a conduit, a link between humanity and the forces reshaping the universe, they could use his connection to amplify the signal once more. This time, instead of apologizing, they would ask for guidance. They would plead with the universe to show them how to restore balance, not just on Earth, but everywhere. The idea was risky. Amplifying the signal again could trigger even more instability, potentially making things worse. But they had no other choice. Humanity's survival depended on finding a way to communicate with the intelligence behind the phenomenon, an intelligence that seemed to encompass both Earth and the stars. On the night of the second experiment, they returned to the same remote mountain peak. The equipment was ready, the calculations double-checked. Matteo stood at the center of the setup, his hands trembling but his resolve firm. As Elena and Priya monitored the readings, Matteo closed his eyes and focused on the hum in his chest. He reached out not just to Earth, but to the stars, the galaxies, the infinite expanse of the universe. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground trembled violently, and the air crackled with electricity. The swirling vortex from Matteo's dreams appeared above them, pulsating with blinding light. The figures from his vision stepped forward, their starlit forms shimmering, brighter than ever. And then, a voice not in his mind, but in the air around them spoke. You seek balance, it said, its tone neither angry nor forgiving, but neutral, like the ticking of a clock. To achieve it, you must sacrifice. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sacrifice what? Elena, Matteo, and Priya exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected guidance, answers, but this felt more like a test. Before they could respond, the vortex collapsed, plunging them back into darkness. The stars above settled into new patterns, unfamiliar but stable. The chaos subsided, leaving behind a strange stillness. Had they succeeded, or had they merely delayed the inevitable? Only time would tell. But as Elena looked at her son, exhausted but alive, she allowed herself a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, humanity had been given another chance, not just to survive, but to thrive, to coexist with the universe rather than exploit it. Somewhere deep inside, Matteo knew one thing for certain. The journey was far from over. The days following the second experiment were unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. The chaos that had gripped the planet and the universe began to settle, though the scars of what had happened remained visible. Rivers flowed again, but in new paths carved by the storms. Forests grew back, their trees taller and denser than before. The stars above no longer flickered erratically. Instead, they shone with a steady light, forming constellations unfamiliar yet oddly comforting. But it wasn't just the physical world that changed, it was the way people saw themselves. For centuries, humanity had treated Earth as a resource to be exploited, a silent backdrop to its endless pursuit of progress. Now, after hearing the voice of Gaia and witnessing the universe's response, people began to see the planet and the cosmos as something alive, something sentient, something deserving of respect. Elena, Matteo, and Priya became accidental heroes in the eyes of the public. Their efforts to communicate with Earth and the stars had sparked a global awakening. People rallied around their message of balance and harmony, determined to make amends for centuries of neglect. Governments implemented sweeping reforms aimed at healing the planet. Corporations that had once resisted change now embraced sustainability, realizing that their survival depended on it. Communities came together to plant trees, clean oceans, and protect endangered species. It was as if the entire world had been given a second chance, and this time they weren't going to waste it. Mateo, however, found himself struggling to adjust. After the second experiment, the humming in his chest and the whispers in his mind didn't disappear. They softened, becoming faint echoes rather than overwhelming sensations. He still dreamed of the glowing field and the shimmering figures, but their presence felt less urgent, more distant. At first, he worried that he'd somehow failed, that maybe the universe hadn't forgiven humanity after all. But then he realized something important. The dreams weren't warnings anymore. They were reminders. One evening, as he sat outside sketching constellations under the new night sky, Elena joined him. She carried 2 cups of hot chocolate, handing one to her son before sitting down beside him. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. Mateo shrugged, sipping his drink. "I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm waiting for something else to happen. Like we're not done yet." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe we're not. Or maybe the waiting is part of it. You've already done so much, kiddo. More than anyone could have asked. But what if it's not enough?" Mateo pressed. "What if the universe decides we messed up too badly?" Elena placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing lightly. "Then we keep trying. That's all any of us can do. We've been given a chance to fix things, to live differently. And even if we don't get everything right, at least we'll know we tried." Her words stayed with Mateo long after they went inside. Over the next few weeks, he threw himself into helping others understand what had happened. He spoke at schools, community centers, and online forums, sharing his experiences and encouraging people to think about their connection to the planet. His sketches of constellations became popular online, inspiring others to look up at the night sky with fresh eyes. Slowly, he began to feel a sense of purpose, not as someone special or chosen, but as part of a collective effort to heal the Earth. Priya, meanwhile, dedicated herself to studying the lingering effects of the signal. Though the universe seemed stable again, subtle changes continued to occur. Time still moved slightly faster in some regions and slower in others. Gravity occasionally fluctuated, causing strange phenomena like floating rocks or sudden bursts of energy. But these anomalies weren't destructive. They were fascinating, offering glimpses into how the rules of physics had been rewritten. Working alongside other scientists, Priya published papers documenting her findings, hoping to inspire a new generation of researchers to explore the mysteries of the universe. Her work reminded everyone that while humanity had taken a step toward redemption, there was still so much to learn. The universe was vast, complex, and full of wonders, and now, more than ever, people were eager to understand it. As for Elena, she returned to her research with renewed passion. The events of the past weeks had changed her perspective completely. She no longer saw Earth as merely a subject of study. She saw it as a partner, a living being worthy of care and admiration. Her lectures drew larger crowds than ever, filled with students hungry for knowledge and hope. She encouraged them to think beyond their own lifetimes, to consider the legacy they would leave behind, not just for future generations, but for the planet itself. Months passed, and life began to resemble something close to normal. The storms stopped, the auroras faded, and the stars settled into their new patterns. People adapted to the changes, finding beauty in the unfamiliar. Farmers learned to grow crops in soil enriched by volcanic ash. Engineers developed technologies powered by renewable energy harvested from the planet's magnetic field. Artists created works inspired by the swirling colors of the auroras, capturing the awe and wonder of those chaotic weeks. Even Mateo's dreams grew gentler, filled with images of lush forests, crystal clear rivers, and skies ablaze with stars. The figures from the vortex appeared less frequently, their forms softer, almost smiling. When they did speak, their voices carried warmth rather than urgency. "You are learning," they would say. "Keep listening." By the end of the year, humanity had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. Cities were greener, quieter, and more sustainable. People spent more time outdoors, reconnecting with nature. Children grew up learning about the importance of balance, not just between humans and Earth, but between humanity and the universe. The lessons of those chaotic weeks had become ingrained in the fabric of society. One night, as Matteo lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he heard the familiar hum in his chest. It was faint, almost like a lullaby. He closed his eyes and let it guide him into sleep. In his dream, he stood once more in the glowing field, surrounded by the shimmering figures. This time they didn't speak. Instead, they reached out, their starlit hands touching his shoulders, filling him with a deep sense of peace. When Matteo woke the next morning, he felt lighter, freer. The weight of responsibility that had burdened him for so long was gone. He realized that the universe wasn't asking for perfection. It was asking for effort, for love, for gratitude. And as long as humanity kept trying, kept listening, the stars would continue to shine brightly above them. Later that day, as he walked through the park with his mom, Matteo looked up at the sky. The unfamiliar constellations twinkled softly, their light steady and reassuring. For the first time in months, he smiled not out of relief, but out of hope. Hope that humanity had finally learned to listen. Hope that Earth and the stars had forgiven them. And hope that, together, they could build a future worth dreaming about. The end.